joining us now to talk about the Paul Levesque portion and any other notable events coming out of the press conference is Brandon Thurston, who joins us now. And Brandon, we got we got the amended complaint on Friday. Was not expecting it to drop after 10 p.m. Eastern time, but that was when 101 pages dropped. And
yes,
as did everything I'm sure you were doing at that particular time on a Friday.
I was waiting and waiting, and I went to bed and I said, I'm going to have to get out of bed at some point, I think, and I did.
So before we get to the press conference, I mean, we talked a bit about it last night, but it was at a point where we hadn't even gotten to go through all the 101 pages. For people that have not been able to go through it, what would you say were the new things that were learned in the amended complaint that would have maybe jumped out, the couple of things that they went into more detail regarding?
Generally, I would say that these were a lot of minor details that were added to attempt to fortify the argument that Janel Grant was sex trafficked and that the arbitration clause should not stand. The thing I think that will jump out to wrestling fans the most, though, is that Michael Hayes is mentioned here as somebody who Vince McMahon instructed, allegedly, Janel Grant to send a photo, not to Michael Hayes directly, but to Vince for sharing with Michael Hayes and the writing team. A photo which is described in the amended complaint as customized pornographic content. That's the biggest revelation, you could say. In addition to that, we have now the names of the various individuals whose names will be familiar to wrestling fans. By and large, those names which were previously anonymized behind various pseudonyms, those names have been spelled out. And those include Brock Lesnar, who allegedly Vince was trafficking sexual encounters with Janel Grant to Brock Lesnar as part of talent renegotiations. We also have the four WB corporate officers who are not accused of abuse, but are accused of enabling Vince and having awareness of the relationship. And those include Nick Khan, who's, of course, still with the WB, Brad Blum, the former general counsel, Brian Nurse. I'm not sure what's going on with Stephanie McMahon. And I have asked who is corporate officer number 3. Her name was included in the original complaint in some portions where they're referring to her public statements, but they seem to have actually replaced her name. So I'm not sure if that's an error or not. In any case, Ann Callis, who's the attorney for Janel Grant, has confirmed all 4 of the names and has confirmed that is Stephanie McMahon who's being referred to in those cases. Additionally, we do have Rich Herring, the Warrior Award recipient, who is involved in government relations for WWE, worked for WWE for decades. He is also named as somebody who's previously referred to as WWE employee number 1. He is not accused of abuse, but he's someone who is characterized as very influential and very feared. I believe he's compared to Jerry McDevitt as the only person who's more feared as Jerry McDevitt at one point. And we have Dr. Carlin Kolker, for people who've been following this case, and especially while it was on hold over the summer. Vince McMahon allegedly sent Janel Grant to get treatments at Dr. Kolker's clinic called Peak Wellness, where she was given allegedly various substances and prescriptions that she wasn't told what she was being given. Grant has made it clear that she is reserving the right to potentially add him as a defendant, and they would be joining WB, Vince McMahon, and John Laurinaitis. So she may, in the future, add Kolker and the clinic itself. Those are the big headlines. But do you guys have any others that jump out to you here?
I guess it's worth talking about. I guess, like, they did include the blueprints of the WWE office where Janel Grant's office was situated, where she shared a wall with Paul Levesque, and that there was a door that was attached to John Laurinaitis' office. And
yes,
I mean, the wording in this is that both Brad Blum and Nick Khan were involved in the planning of Laurinaitis' custom suite where Ms. Grant would ultimately be exploited. Now, you can read into that whatever you will. They're obviously implying something here, that this was you are left to interpret like what they are trying to get at here, but they're giving you a physical description of how close Janel Grant was in proximity to John Laurinaitis, to the point that her office shared a door with his office.
And to be clear, it's in that office that Grant alleges that she was sexually assaulted by both Laurinaitis and Vince McMahon on occasion. And she also alleges that she was instructed to go to Laurinaitis' office, and Laurinaitis would instruct her to perform oral sex on him. And she's pointing out that this is a room, this is an office that was sharing a wall with Triple H's Paul Levesque's office. And I was just looking at this before I came on air here, and it is, you can see where it does say Triple H, Paul Levesque, and it does say here's Laurinaitis' office, and here's the EA for Laurinaitis, and it says Grant. So that's what it's showing there in that diagram.
Brandon, what's been some of the response you've been seeing from maybe the greater public? Because, you know, a lot of these things, I suppose, are still allegations, but I think what could be a very real consequence is just their effects on maybe the wrestling consuming audience. Have you felt like there's been much response so far?
I try not to read much of the response way. I think there's people who are following this. I would like to think that there's a lot of adults who are interested in this case and are following it, and who are, you know, I think they add all these facts together, especially considering Vince's history, where he has various allegations, not just from Janel Grant, but from 6 other women who accuse him of various kinds of sexual misconduct over the decades. And I think this is a big story, and I think regardless of what anybody thinks of it, I think it's, you know, as a reporter, I think it is one of the biggest stories in wrestling history, given we're talking about the most powerful, I think bar none, uncontroversially, the most powerful person in the history of pro wrestling, allegedly sex trafficking and sexually assaulting one of his employees.
And I think two of the big takeaways from this, number one, I think that this was certainly a more, like, if you had read the first complaint from a year ago, you're probably not going to be as horrified reading this one, because it's going into further detail. It's also expanding upon a lot of the text messages. And, you know, the key argument here is this NDA, and whether this judge is going to recommend arbitration or that this will be tried in court. And one of the key arguments that they're making, and they include, is like Vince McMahon and how persistent he was on Janel Grant signing this NDA. And they have like the text of the voicemail,
yes,
and stating like, you have my company over a barrel. Like, he is being very forceful in having her sign this. And her argument is that this was signed under duress. And they certainly do have the language that would support that. But ultimately, it's going to be Judge Sarah Russell's, you know, interpretation of this. And that's ultimately going to be the decision here of whether this NDA is held up or thrown out.
Yes. Can we swear on this podcast? Because we have a lot of F words here.
Please.
See, he says that, you know, he's describing in this voicemail, and I think it's interesting to learn exactly sort of what the details are that led up to this NDA being signed, and why Vince felt that there was such an urgency to do it, and to do it in short order. This NDA was signed in January 2022, and Vince, in this voicemail, which is transcribed, he's describing this important board of directors meeting that's coming up, and there's something called the audit committee on a board of directors, and you have to apparently tell them whether or not there's any pending litigation that you're involved in, and you're supposed to do this honestly, of course. And he's describing how Jerry McDevitt, the longtime lawyer for Vince McMahon and for WWE, he's describing how Jerry McDevitt is involved in these discussions with the audit committee, and Jerry McDevitt is also working with Vince McMahon to draft and execute this NDA with Janel Grant. So naturally, Jerry McDevitt has knowledge of this NDA that is currently being negotiated some days away from this meeting, where they're going to have to disclose to the board whether there's any pending litigation that you're involved in. So you get sort of this rambling transcript of a voicemail where he says things like, I'm double fucked and stuff like that. He's very urgently you could say pressure, and I'm sure Grant's side would say pressuring Grant to hurry up and get this signed, because Vince is describing his fear of having to let the board know about this relationship and this NDA that he's working on, this relationship with Grant, and the risk that that would bring to his position in the company and to his marriage with Linda McMahon. So this is all important to Grant's argument about doing away with the arbitration clause. And arbitration, for anybody who doesn't know, is where you go to private mediation, where you work with like a retired judge. And this is all out of the public eye, which is, you would think, where WWE and Vince McMahon want this. They want this out of the public eye in private arbitration. It'll get settled there. We won't really know much at all about this process as opposed to public court. And the way that an arbitration clause, which is part of this agreement, ends up being ruled unenforceable is that you have to basically show that one of the parties was under duress, or there was some sort of fraud going on in the process of this agreement, or there might be public policies that allow the judge to say, no, we shouldn't enforce this. And that's where the Grant side is pointing to things like the Speak Out Act that are supposed to advocate for people who have been victims of sexual assault and sexual harassment in the workplace. So that's part of what they're getting in there. And in a lot of other ways, they're just fortifying their argument about why this arbitration issue in particular should not be enforced, because that is going to be really at the heart of things going forward, as we've already seen the defendants move to try to get this into arbitration. For now, their motions have been put aside, but they're certainly going to refile those. And eventually the judge is going to have to make a decision about whether or not the arbitration agreement stands. And for us, as covering it as a news story, if this goes to arbitration, it's going to be pretty difficult to cover it.
And just citing the language from the amended complaint specific to what kind of spurred on the push to get Janel Grant to sign this NDA. In January 2022, McMahon told Ms. Grant that his wife had found out about their relationship, purportedly to avoid divorce, negative publicity, and other repercussions. And despite the fact that Ms. Grant never expressed a desire to take legal action, McMahon said that Ms. Grant's time at WWE was at an end and that he wanted her to sign an NDA to ensure her silence on, among other things, his personal misconduct. Even after pushing Ms. Grant out of the company and muzzling her with an NDA, McMahon continued efforts to exploit her, including attempting to traffic her to WWE star Brock Lesnar, who would be in New York City for a live event and TV taping in March 2022. And that's important because the NDA was signed on January 28th. And this is a point that Brandon has brought up multiple times, is does that NDA cover for future allegations such as like we know of alleged incidents that occurred after January 28th, and you have...
And the NDA itself is an exhibit. Anybody can read it as part of this lawsuit. And the NDA says language to the effect of this covers everything in the past and it doesn't cover anything in the future. So you would think that this is going to be something that's going to at least complicate this case. The fact that she alleges, she doesn't put a date on it, but she does specify that it is after January 28th, 2022, that she alleges that she met Vince McMahon at his apartment and saw him in person for the last time. And she describes in graphic detail how she was sexually assaulted at that time, allegedly.
Yeah. And also what I found to be extremely damning is like there is literally a text message of Vince McMahon telling her to go to Greenville, South Carolina, even if it's just to say hi to Brock. I mean, it's really tough to look at this and not see it as plain as day as like what is being instructed here. And I think that like if you want to try and poke holes in any of this story, like there's a lot of enough concrete in this that is demonstrated through the push to sign this NDA, what is alleged, and the conduct of Vince McMahon that has been represented in these text messages. That alone is extremely damning.
And I guess to put the trafficking allegations in some context of what's being alleged, not only does she allege that she was sexually assaulted on numerous occasions by Vince and by John Laurinaitis, but that this was in the context of her working for WWE. And you certainly have various incidents that are described happening right at WWE headquarters. But in addition to that, she's alleging that she was trafficked to John Laurinaitis as part of you could say his compensation for working for WWE.
They had a schedule like worked out. Like this was like a routine that she was like following.
She was to meet him at a hotel and so forth. Yeah. And she's alleging that as part of Brock Lesnar's talent contract negotiation, a sexual encounter did not occur, but a sexual encounter was planned, and for various reasons, I believe 3 different times, it didn't end up happening, whether it's for weather or because Brock Lesnar got too drunk at dinner or because of COVID-19 concerns. And she's alleging that there are all these occasions where Vince shared, without her permission, naked pictures of her with other people who are working for WWE, and adding the Michael Hayes story onto it is just another instance to the pile of alleged incidents where he's sharing naked pictures of her with others, and whether or not these people know that this woman is an employee of WWE, certainly Vince does, and it's being framed in such a way that this was part of why he was employing her. That's the Grant perspective.
So roughly 24 hours after the amended complaint is sent out, Paul Levesque goes in front of the media tonight after the Royal Rumble, and Way and I, obviously, we have not seen any of the press conference. Was any of
you didn't miss much?
Was any of this brought up in any way, shape, or form?
No, there were 4 questions. None of them had anything to do with the Grant lawsuit or any other controversies. He was asked about the Hall of Fame, and that story. He told that story. He was asked about what stands out about the first event of this Indiana Sports Corporation deal, and how has that gone? How are you? Question number 3 was, how are you looking for this road to WrestleMania, and what are the ramifications for tonight? And finally, question 4 was, have you seen a statistical impact on W's numbers since getting iShow Speed and Kai Cenat? And he talked a little bit about that. There were no questions about this. There were some other business highlights, but I don't know if we want to go to those just yet. And of course, everyone applauded at the end.
So the closest we got was, what are the ramifications of tonight
for WrestleMania? Very, very much a storyline question. No questions. We did our best, John. We put some questions out there on social media for people to reference and read over and think over, but no questions whatsoever related to this, which is not that surprising.
Well, it's, to me, I feel that this complaint, I mean, it will really gauge what the level of coverage that this receives does generate. This was actually a comical moment where
yes.
Paul announced over 70,000 people, and the graphic undersold Paul's total by like 5,000 people.
Yes, he said 70,347. And yes, as you said, there's the graphic and Way is showing it on the screen. 65,470. WrestleTix is right in between those at last count, 67,590. So I don't know if they were not including the suites in one of these numbers or what was going on there. But we have some information about the gate. And at one point on commentary, Michael Cole said that this was the 3rd biggest gate in WWE history. Paul Levesque reiterated that. You've got to do the decoding here, and you've got to have some WrestleNomics articles handy to figure out what this really means. It looks like this did well over $17 million is what I derive from what he's saying. He's saying that this was the 3rd biggest WWE gate ever, bar none, and only WrestleMania Saturday and Sunday of last year were ahead of it. Those were in the neighborhood of $17 and $18 million each. So therefore, it has to be greater than the $17.3 million, including ticket fees, for WrestleMania 32 in 2016. So greater than $17.3 million is what he's saying here. And I believe the lesser of the 2 nights last year was 17.7 for Saturday. So I guess we could say and that's without fees. So I figure it's a little bit more it could be 18 with fees. So it's in the range somewhere of maybe the high 17 million, that mark.
Yeah. And it really does, set things for Las Vegas, which, I mean, I just feel those are going to be number 1 and 2.
Probably have already surpassed that, if I were to guess, just based on where they are at the moment, given what we've seen for the ticket sales. I was just looking earlier tonight, $340 is the cheapest ticket that you can currently buy for either individual night of WrestleMania. Well,
if every seat was filled and this was in fact sold out, was this a disappointing event for Mark Shapiro?
I don't think so. I'm sure he's thrilled.
They hate when they sell out. They realize that means we didn't price tickets high enough.
Right. You need to price it because I mean, and that makes sense from a supply and demand. Don't tell people online that, but it's just supply and demand. If you've got a high demand, if you're really popular, then you can charge higher ticket prices. I suppose the only potential criticism of that strategy, though, is that, well, maybe if there's a day where you're not as popular as you are now, and you go back to these towns and try to charge them, if you try to sell an event, that you might not be able to draw the same fans back if they feel disgruntled about higher ticket prices.
We'll let you go in a minute, Brandon. I know it is late, but Wade, do you have any thought? Did you think that this would be addressed at the press conference?
I thought there'd be a very good chance, John, just by what precedent has been set, by how fresh the story is in comparison to even last time. Like, we're talking about less than 24 hours. Mm-hmm. So yeah, a little bit surprised. Again, I haven't seen the press conference itself to know maybe what the pacing of it was for. I mean, feels like somewhat less than maybe what he usually takes, or maybe around the number that he usually
sometimes takes. He'll say, "Give me another one." I mean, 4 is pretty normal, I would say. It would be, and minimum, but normal. I think, and it was a year ago, and I was there in Tampa for the Royal Rumble a year ago. Just what was it at that point, 2 or 3 days after the Grant lawsuit had been filed. And I think that was sort of an earth-shattering moment for wrestling news. That was a big moment. And, for better or worse, this just isn't as big onto the consciousness of wrestling fans, and I suppose, therefore, for the people in the room. And I believe there were 5 questions at that press conference a year ago. 3 of them were about the lawsuit, or something to that effect. 2 were not. So I just, quite frankly, I don't have a lot of faith in the people in the room to ask questions. I think WWE has done a fascinating job in, rewarding people and making people feel like they're part of something fascinating and exciting. And I think it dissuades critical media and critical thought towards their policies, towards their controversies and their scandals. So I don't think that there's much incentive. What do you gain from it? I tell you what you don't gain. You get people quite possibly harassing you online in large numbers if you do that, as John and I have experienced. So it's not that surprising. And we're seeing trends like this, I think, in the larger world, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. I mean, I can't say I'm stunned by it, but like comparing it to a year ago, like, yes, WWE was named as a defendant a year ago, but it was very much like so much, especially in the immediate, so much of it was on Vince, and he resigns, and it's, what are you going to do to handle this? And this year, like when you looked at the amended complaint coupled with the reporting from The Athletic and New York Times about Leaf Fitting, this is becoming more of a WWE culture issue, that it does, like the idea of just, the cancer has been removed, and yet there is, I think, still an overall absence of an understanding of like what kind of culture are we allowing, and who are we at ease in bringing in, and what safeguards are also in place. Like those all remain open-ended questions. And I think in this amended complaint, you're certainly seeing the idea that this, like WWE has been a defendant from day one, and there's a reason that they have attached WWE to this, and they have done quite a masterful job of isolating this to be the problem is gone. And if you're bringing this up at a WWE event, it's like you're souring the party, essentially.
Yeah. And I would suggest along the lines of culture, Nick Khan is not accused of any abuse. He's accused of knowing about the relationship, and he's accused of being part of the neglect that the company is being accused of. But Nick Khan comes from the sports media world, where he was a very successful and influential agent, and it was the agent to numerous names that like Stephen A. Smith and Kirk Herbstreit and a lot more. Tom Rinaldi, whose voice you heard tonight on Royal Rumble. And the sports media world has its own culture problems that I would suggest, his association and perhaps his tolerance for it. This is someone who hired Jamie Horowitz to be an EVP at WWE shortly after he came to WWE. Jamie Horowitz is someone who was fired from Fox after allegations of sexual harassment. Nick Khan has now hired Lee Fitting, someone who was fired from ESPN after allegations of sexual harassment. It raises questions about what kind of culture do you trust Nick Khan to oversee in WWE, given it's not a deal breaker, at least for him to hire people like Jamie Horowitz and to hire somebody like Lee Fitting about a year ago, even despite the fact that you just went through a long and painful process of investigating the various allegations of misconduct against Vince and others, the company and its own culture issues. So these are complicated questions, and unfortunately, I don't expect most of the media to have the audacity to ask Paul Levesque about them.
Well, coming up this Wednesday, it will be the audacity of Pollock and Thurston, 1 p.m. Eastern time. And if you can't wait until Wednesday, patreon.com/WrestleNomics. And you can also catch Brandon's story up on postwrestling.com, where he goes through the whole amended complaint and isolates the most significant revelations and further information that we learned on Friday. And I'm sure we will be following up on this in a big way coming up this Wednesday. So, Brandon, thank you very much for staying up late, watching the press conference, and joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me. See you guys later.
Thank you, Brandon. If you like this video, consider joining our Patreon, the Post Wrestling Cafe. Multiple bonus podcasts every week, ad-free shows, and access to our full archive. Otherwise, a like and subscribe is much appreciated. Thank you for watching.